Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Lainey, and this is the story of how my wedding day, the day that was supposed to be the beautiful beginning of my forever, turned into a trial by fire. And I mean that literally. I stared in disbelief as flames greedily engulfed my wedding gown. The ivory satin, the delicate, hand-stitched lace overlay that had taken a wonderful seamstress in Little Italy 6 months to perfect, the dress I'd saved for, dreamed of, and cried happy tears over when I first tried it on, it was now a blackening, melting ruin on the antique hardwood floor of the bridal suite. It's a strange thing, what your mind focuses on in a moment of pure, shattering shock. It wasn't the flames themselves, but the details. I remember the acrid, chemical smell of burning polyester and silk, a scent that caught in the back of my throat and made my eyes water. I remember the sound, a soft, hungry crackle that was the complete opposite of the joyful string quartet music drifting up from the ceremony space below. The quartet was playing Clair de Lune, my favorite. Such a beautiful, peaceful sound for such an ugly, violent moment. We were only 30 minutes out. 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle and marry Grant. In my mind, I could already picture the whole day. The first kiss, the champagne toast, the clumsy but joyful first dance. It was all planned. Every detail was perfect. My maid of honor, my best friend since college, Corinne, stood frozen beside me, her hand covering her mouth in a perfect O of horror. Her lavender dress, the one we'd agonized over for weeks, was a stark, beautiful contrast to the smoldering wreckage at my feet. The other two bridesmaids, Tina and Jessica, were just statues. Mannequins with horrified expressions painted on their faces, unable to process what they were seeing. And then there was Paige. My sister. My younger sister, Paige, stood before us all, a disposable plastic lighter still clutched in her manicured hand, its tiny flame sputtering out. But I wasn't looking at the lighter. I was looking at her face. It was twisted into a mask of triumphant rage, an expression I had never seen on her before, not in all our years of shared secrets, childhood blanket forts, and petty sisterly spats. Her eyes, usually so full of mischievous life, were burning with a terrifying fire of their own. "He was supposed to be mine," she shrieked, her voice high and brittle, shattering the stunned silence of the room. She took a step back, looking immensely pleased with herself, admiring her handiwork as if she'd just painted a masterpiece instead of destroying one. "He was never really yours, Lainey. My name is Lainey Mitchell." Well, in about 28 minutes, it was supposed to be Lainey Davenport. At 32, I'd built a good, solid life for myself. I had a career I was proud of in advertising, a small but lovely apartment overlooking the Cuyahoga River, and I'd finally found Grant. Grant Davenport. He was solid. Dependable. The kind of man you build a future with. The kind of man who called your dad to ask for his blessing. Or so I thought. I never, not in a million years, expected to be watching my own sister burn my future to the ground. Corinne was the first to snap out of it. "Paige! My God, what have you done?" she gasped, rushing forward as if she could somehow bat out the last of the embers with her bare hands. Paige just laughed, a sound as sharp and ugly as breaking glass. "I did what needed to be done," she spat, her venomous gaze locked on mine. "You stole him from me. You knew I had a crush on him in the beginning, but you just had to have him. You always have to win, don't you, big sister? Always have to be the perfect one, the successful one." I couldn't speak. My mind was a dizzying whirlwind of confusion. A crush? She'd mentioned, maybe once, years ago when I first started dating him, that she thought he was cute. It was a fleeting, teenage-like comment that I'd forgotten seconds later. For the past 2 years, she had been nothing but supportive. She helped me plan. She gushed over the ring. She threw me a beautiful bridal shower just last month, giving a tearful speech about how happy she was for us. It was all a lie. Every smile, every hug, every excited late-night phone call. I'll lie. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, the smoke filling my lungs, and for a second, I thought I was going to pass out right there on the ashes of my dress. My mind raced, desperately trying to catch up to reality. The smoke was getting thicker now, a gray haze that made the festive floral arrangements in the room look like funeral wreaths. Jessica, one of my other bridesmaids, finally snapped into action and moved quickly to wrench open a window, letting in a gust of cool September air. The sounds from outside, the gentle hum of Cleveland traffic, the distant laughter of guests arriving, felt like they were from another planet, another lifetime. My entire world had shrunk to this room, this suffocating smell, this unimaginable betrayal. Paige tossed her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder, a gesture of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "The wedding's off, obviously," she said, waving her hand dismissively as if she were shooing away a fly. "I'll just tell everyone you got cold feet." A classic runaway bride. It happens. Grant will be upset for a while, of course, but he'll get over it. He'll come back to me. He always does. He always does. That simple phrase hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't a hopeful fantasy, it was a statement of fact. A cold dread, far worse than the shock of the fire, began to creep up my spine, chilling me from the inside out. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive act of jealousy. This was calculated. This was the endgame of something that had been happening for a long, long time. And that's when my training kicked in. It's strange, isn't it? How your professional life can bleed into your personal crises. 6 years at a top advertising agency, working with impossibly difficult clients and managing multi-million-dollar campaigns that went completely off the rails, it taught me one thing: in a crisis, you don't panic. You don't fall apart. You assess, you strategize, and you find a new angle. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing evened out. I took a slow, deliberate step away from the smoldering dress, reached into the pocket of the silk robe hanging on the back of the door, and pulled out my phone. My voice, when I finally spoke, was surprisingly steady. It was the voice I used when a client's campaign was tanking and I had to present the grim data. It was the voice of cold, hard facts. "You have no idea what you just did, Paige." She laughed again, that same brittle, grating sound. "Oh, I think I do. I saved my future. I saved Grant from the biggest mistake of his life." "What are you going to do, Lainey? Call the police?" "It's my word against yours." A little sisterly fight that got out of hand. "Who are they going to believe?" I didn't answer. I just unlocked my phone and pressed a button, watching her face as I did. On the screen, comments were already popping up from the live stream feed. "Is that smoke? What's happening in the bridal suite? Is this part of the show? Are you sure about that?" I asked, turning the screen toward her. On it was a live, crystal-clear view of the ceremony space downstairs. The elegant rows of white chairs, the stunning floral arch at the altar where I was supposed to marry the love of my life. And at the back, above the entrance, was the massive projection screen we'd set up for a photo slideshow during the reception. It was now displaying a perfect, high-definition view of this very room. Showing Paige, in all her destructive glory, her face contorted in a triumphant sneer, the lighter still in her hand. Her face went from smug to sheet-white in a single heartbeat. Her jaw fell slack. What is that?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "The wedding live stream," I explained calmly. "For Grant's grandparents in Florida who couldn't travel. For my Aunt Carol who's on a cruise in Alaska. It's been running for the past 20 minutes, Paige." Capturing everyone arriving, the musicians setting up, I paused, letting the horror of it all sink in, meeting her terrified eyes. "And you. Destroying my wedding dress while announcing to the world that you're in love with my fiancé." Paige lunged for my phone, her perfect composure finally shattering into a million pieces. "You planned this. You twisted, evil, you set me up." Corinne, my ever-loyal protector, stepped between us. She didn't set you up, Paige. Everyone just watched you commit arson on live video. I think you should take a moment to consider your next move. And just then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming message on the screen. Tina, my third bridesmaid, who was standing closest, read it and gasped. It's Grant. He's seen it. He's coming to the bridal suite. Paige's eyes widened in sheer, animal panic. She looked frantically around the room, from the open window to the locked door, like a cornered fox searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. The live feed on my phone was still running, and through its tiny speaker, we could hear a low, shocked murmur spreading through the gathered guests downstairs. The camera operator, bless their professional soul, had realized something major was happening. The angle had shifted, they had abandoned the wide shot of the room and were now panning across the faces in the front row. I saw Grant's father, Richard Davenport, a stoic man I deeply respected, sitting stone-faced, his jaw tight. I saw his wife, Eleanor, with a hand clasped over her chest, her face a mask of disbelief. I saw Grant's best man, Tom, his mouth hanging open, already starting to stand up and rush toward the building. But the most telling image was of Grant himself. He was no longer waiting patiently at the altar. The camera caught him for just a second, a fleeting image of him sprinting up the center aisle, his face a mask of what I first thought was shock and fury. But now, with the poisonous seed of doubt Paige had planted, I looked closer. I replayed the image in my mind. It wasn't just fury. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. The fear of being caught. The door to the bridal suite burst open, crashing against the wall with a sound that made us all jump. Grant stood there, breathless, his chest heaving under his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes darted around the room, a frantic, sweeping gaze that took in the scene. They moved from my face, to his best man Tom who had followed him up, to the ruined dress on the floor, and then, they landed on Paige. And they stayed there. For just a fraction of a second too long. It was a look I couldn't decipher, but it wasn't the look of a man seeing a crazy person who had just attacked his bride. It wasn't a look of pure condemnation. It was something else. Something complicated. Familiar. What in God's name happened? He demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. He finally looked at me, but his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. He was looking at a spot just over my shoulder. Lainey, are you okay? He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand, but it felt rehearsed. His concern felt like a performance for the audience I knew he had, his best man, my bridesmaids, and potentially the 100+ people still watching on the live stream downstairs. He was doing what he thought a devoted fiancé should do. Mom and Dad are on their way up, Tom said from the doorway, his own face pale with confusion. They're freaking out. Grant's focus snapped back to Paige. Paige, tell me you didn't do this, he said, and the tone of his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It was pleading. He was pleading with her to give him a story, an out, a lie he could work with. It was the wrong question. It shouldn't have been a question at all. It should have been an accusation. It should have been pure, righteous anger on my behalf. Paige, ever the actress, saw her opportunity. She burst into a storm of crocodile tears. Grant, I'm so sorry, she wailed, her voice catching theatrically. I saw her about to put on that dress, and I couldn't stand it. I love you so much, I couldn't bear to watch her marry you. I watched him. I watched my fiancé, the man I had promised my life to, the man whose children I had imagined. And I saw him hesitate. He looked from Paige's tear-streaked, pleading face to my own stony, silent expression, and for a terrifying moment, he looked utterly lost. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't immediately shield me. He didn't unleash a torrent of fury on my sister. He was frozen, trapped between the two of us, and in that single, damning moment of indecision, he told me everything I needed to know. The betrayal wasn't just Paige's. It was his, too. Grant, I said, my voice cutting through Paige's sobs like a knife. It was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the entire room. Look at me. He finally forced his eyes to meet mine. They were filled with panic and a desperate, silent plea for me to, what? To play along? To smooth this over? To fix this for him? Whose side are you on, Grant? I asked. It was the simplest question in the world, but from the look on his face, you would have thought I'd asked him to solve cold fusion. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He just stared, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him, and all he could do was watch. The air in the room was thick with unspoken truths, so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Grant and Paige stood there, two deer caught in the blinding headlights of my quiet question, and they began the most clumsy, pathetic performance I have ever witnessed. She's obsessed with me. Grant finally blurted out, finding his voice and pointing a trembling finger at Paige. He was trying to take control, to cast himself as the innocent victim in this soap opera. I swear, Lainey. It's been going on for months. She's been sending me messages, showing up where I am. I kept telling her to stop, that I loved you, but she wouldn't listen. I didn't want to tell you because I knew how much it would hurt you, how it would ruin your relationship with your sister. I was trying to protect you. It was a plausible lie. A good lie, even. The kind of lie a caring, protective fiancé would tell. A month ago, I would have wrapped my arms around him and thanked him for his misplaced chivalry. But now, after seeing that split second of hesitation in his eyes, his words sounded hollow, tinny, like a bad actor reading from a script. Paige, not to be outdone, picked up her cue with the skill of a seasoned dramatist. He's lying, she wailed, collapsing onto a nearby velvet chair and burying her face in her hands. He led me on. He told me he loved me, that he was only marrying you because of the pressure from his family to settle down. He said you were the sensible choice, the right choice on paper, but I was the one he truly wanted, the one who made him feel alive. They went back and forth, a bizarre and desperate tennis match of accusations. Each volley was more ridiculous than the last. He claimed she was a stalker who had twisted his kindness. She claimed he was a manipulative liar who had promised her the world. I just stood there, by the open window, letting the cool breeze wash over my face. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a terrible play from the back row. I was an observer at my own funeral. The funeral of my relationship, of my trust in the two people I thought I knew best in the world. Corinne stood beside me, her arm protectively around my shoulders, a silent, solid presence. Don't listen to them, Lainey, she whispered, her voice fierce. They're just rats trying to escape a sinking ship. I knew she was right. But a part of me, the stupid, hopeful part that was still dying a slow and painful death, was still listening. I was searching for a single word of truth, a single crack in their performance that would prove this was all just a horrible, horrible nightmare. Then I saw it. It wasn't a word. It was a thing. A small, glittering thing on Paige's wrist as she gestured dramatically. A delicate silver bracelet with a single, tiny sapphire charm. It was beautiful. And I knew exactly where it came from. My mind flashed back 3 months. Grant and I were on a weekend trip to Chicago for our anniversary. We were walking down Michigan Avenue, window shopping. I had seen the bracelet in the window of a small, independent jewelry store. I had pointed it out. Oh, Grant, look, I'd said. That's so pretty. Paige would love that for her birthday. He had just nodded, seemingly distracted, and pulled me into a different store to look at watches. He ended up getting her a gift card for her birthday. Or so he said. But there it was. On her wrist. The proof. The little blue stone winked at me from across the room, a tiny, silent testament to his lies. I remained silent, letting their drama play out as the room filled with more people. Grant's parents, Richard and Eleanor, arrived, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion. My own parents were right behind them, my mother's face pale with shock, my father's dark with a gathering storm of anger. He had worked so hard, putting aside money for years into a special fund to give me this perfect day, this perfect dress. All of it was turning to ash, just like my dream. "What is going on here?" my father demanded, his voice booming in the suddenly crowded room. Grant and Paige both started talking at once, their stories tangling together in a web of pathetic lies. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was watching my parents. I saw the deep, wrenching pain in my mother's eyes as she looked at Paige, her youngest daughter, hysterical and accusatory. I saw the confusion on my father's face turn to cold fury as he looked at Grant. I let them spin their tales for another minute, letting the absurdity and the ugliness of it all sink in for everyone. I needed everyone in that room to see them for what they were. I needed the foundation to be completely shattered before I brought out the dynamite. When there was a momentary lull in their frantic, overlapping accusations, I took a single step forward. It was a small movement, but it was enough. The room fell silent. All eyes, red-rimmed and shocked, turned to me. "Grant," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of all emotion. It was as if I was discussing a disappointing quarterly report. "Give me your phone." He froze, his face a mask of pure panic. "What?" "Lainey, why?" "Give me your phone," I repeated, holding out my hand. My hand was perfectly steady. "If what you're saying is true, if Paige is just an obsessed stalker and you've been pushing her away for months, then you have nothing to hide, right? The proof will be right there in your messages. Your blocked calls. Your texts telling her to leave you alone." I let the challenge hang in the air. "Show us." Panic flashed in his eyes again, hotter and more desperate this time. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, a lifeline. But he found none. His father was watching him with a narrow, deeply disappointed gaze. My father looked like he was about to physically rip the phone from Grant's pocket himself. Even his mother, Eleanor, who usually doted on him, just looked at him with a pained, questioning expression. "Lainey, this is ridiculous," he stammered, trying to sound reasonable. "We don't need to do this now. This is a family matter. We need to handle this privately." "We are long past privately, Grant," I said, gesturing to my phone, which was still on the table, still connected to the live stream. "Right now, we need the truth." The phone. With a defeated sigh, his shoulders slumping, he reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out his phone. He handed it over. His hands were clammy and cold. I unlocked it. I knew his password. 0-8-1-6, our anniversary. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. We had no secrets, after all. I opened his messages, and my heart, which I thought couldn't possibly break any further, splintered into 1,000 tiny, razor-sharp pieces. It was all there. Right there in glowing black and white. It wasn't a one-sided obsession. It wasn't a recent mistake. It was a full-blown affair. And it hadn't been going on for months. It had been going on for over a year. There were hundreds of messages. Flirtatious texts sent while he was sitting next to me on the couch watching movies. Secret meetups planned while he was supposedly at the gym. Explicit photos they'd sent to each other. I scrolled, my thumb moving mechanically, my mind struggling to process the sheer depth and breadth of the betrayal. "Paige, I miss you. Can't wait for your business trip to Dayton next week." Grant, counting the minutes. This whole wedding planning charade is killing me. Listening to her talk about flower arrangements when all I want is to be with you, it's torture. Paige, you promised you would tell her. You promised you'd choose me before the wedding. Grant, I will, baby, I will. Just be patient. After I marry her, things will be easier for us. We'll have access to her inheritance from her grandmother, we can start our own business, get out of this town. It's a means to an end. Just a little longer. It's a sound financial decision. Inheritance. He had talked about my grandmother's modest inheritance. The money she had left me, which I had planned to use as a down payment on a house for us. He saw it as his seed capital. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was planning to defraud me. He was planning to use my love and my family's legacy as his personal bank. I felt the blood drain from my face. A wave of nausea washed over me. Corinne put a steadying hand on my arm. Lainey? Are you okay? I didn't look at her. I couldn't look at anyone. I kept scrolling until I found the one I was looking for. A message from Grant, sent just last night. The night before our wedding. While I was at home, carefully laying out my vows, he was texting my sister. Grant, don't worry. Tomorrow, I marry my future. But you'll always be my soulmate. I looked up from the screen. The room was silent, everyone watching me, waiting for a verdict. I saw Grant, his face ashen, sweat beading on his forehead. I saw Paige, chewing on her lip, a disgusting flicker of hope in her eyes, thinking maybe, just maybe, she had one. I took a deep breath. And then, I started to read. I read his words out loud, my voice clear and strong and ringing with the awful truth. I read about the business trips. I read about the secret meetings. I read his cold, calculating plans for my inheritance. And finally, I read his message from last night, the one about his future and his soulmate. A collective gasp went through the room. My mother let out a strangled sob and my father moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her. Richard Davenport closed his eyes, his face a mask of pure shame. When I was finished, I locked the phone and held it up. Any more lies you'd like to tell, Grant? I asked, my voice dripping with ice. Or are we finally done with the performance? He just stood there, exposed and defeated, with nothing left to say. The truth was out. And it was uglier than any fire. There was a moment of absolute, deafening silence after I finished reading. The only sound in the room was my mother's heartbroken sobs, a painful, tearing sound that ripped through me. Grant and Paige just stood there, two statues in a museum of their own making, stripped bare of all their lies, their shared guilt hanging in the air like the smoke from my dress. I looked at Grant's face, really looked at it, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the kind, gentle man I thought I loved. I found nothing. Only the pathetic, hollowed-out expression of a man whose scheme had just blown up in his face. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was only sorry that I found out. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, of course, a giant, gaping wound in my chest. But alongside it, a new feeling began to rise up from the depths of my soul, a cold, clear, righteous anger. They weren't going to get away with this. I wasn't going to be the quiet victim who cancelled her wedding and cried into her pillow for months while they figured out their next move. No. They had humiliated me in a room full of my loved ones. They had burned my dream in front of an audience. They had given me a platform. And I was going to use it. I turned to my bridesmaids, my loyal, wonderful friends who looked ready to go to war for me. Corinne, Tina, Jessica. Thank you for everything. But I need you to go downstairs now. Go sit with my parents. Be with them. Lainey, we are not leaving you alone with them, Corinne insisted, her eyes flashing. Yes, you are, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. It was a voice I didn't even recognize as my own. This next part. I have to do it alone. Reluctantly, they nodded and filed out of the room, each one giving me a supportive squeeze on the arm as they passed. I turned and walked toward the door. Grant, finally jolted into action, made a move to stop me. He grabbed my arm. Lainey, wait. Don't. We can talk about this. Please. Don't do anything crazy. I stopped and turned to look at him, my eyes tracing the lines of his face, a face I once thought I would grow old with. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up to his panicked eyes. I didn't say a word. I just raised my other hand and calmly, deliberately, removed his hand from my arm as if I were removing a piece of lint. You had a year to talk to me, Grant, I said, my voice flat. Your time is up. I walked out of the bridal suite, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me. I could hear my father's voice, low and furious, finally erupting. You worthless piece of, I didn't stay to hear the rest. I tuned it out. I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase of the venue, my bare feet cold on the polished marble. I was still wearing the simple white silk slip I had on under my dress. A few venue staff members saw me, their eyes wide with confusion, but no one tried to stop me. I must have been a strange sight, a half-dressed bride walking with the purpose of a general marching into battle. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear the buzz from the ceremony space. The guests were restless, confused, whispering amongst themselves. The live stream camera, I noticed, was now pointed directly at the altar, waiting for a bride who was never going to arrive. Perfect. I pushed open the large oak doors and walked into the ceremony space. A hush fell over the room as every head turned to look at me. The whispers died. The string quartet faltered and went silent. They saw me, not in my $6,000 gown, but in a simple slip, my hair probably a mess from the stress, my face pale but my eyes burning. I walked down the aisle, the very same aisle that was supposed to lead me to my future, lined with rose petals and the smiling faces of my loved ones. I didn't stop until I was standing at the altar, right under the beautiful floral arch that now seemed like a cruel, mocking joke. I took the microphone from its stand. The metal was cool and solid in my hand. I could feel 150 pairs of eyes on me, could feel the unseen weight of the thousands more who were watching online. My hand was shaking, just slightly, but my voice was perfectly steady when I spoke. Good afternoon, everyone, I began, my voice clear and amplified, filling the silent hall. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate what was supposed to be my wedding day. I took a deep breath, the microphone cool and heavy against my fingers. I looked out at the sea of faces, friends from college, my supportive colleagues from work, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my parents and Grant's parents in the front row. Some looked confused, some looked deeply concerned, and some were already staring with that unmistakable look of pity. I didn't want their pity. I wanted their attention. I know you're all wondering what happened, I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, silent room. You saw a small piece of it on the screen just now. You saw my sister, Paige, set fire to my wedding dress. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned to their neighbors, whispering in disbelief. I let them talk for a moment, letting the reality of that one insane fact sink in before I raised my hand for silence. What you didn't see, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, was why. You see, for the past year, my sister, my maid of honor, has been having an affair with my fiancé, Grant. This time, it wasn't a murmur. It was a collective, audible gasp. A sound of pure, unadulterated shock. I saw Grant's father, Richard, take off his glasses and rub his eyes, a gesture of profound weariness and shame. His mother, Eleanor, looked like she was going to be sick. My own parents just looked broken, holding on to each other. They tried to tell me that she was just some obsessed fan and that he was an innocent victim, I explained, my voice ringing with the injustice of it all. They tried to lie their way out of it, right up until a few minutes ago in the bridal suite. I held up Grant's phone, the screen dark, but everyone knew what it was. Unfortunately for them, they left a little evidence. I walked over to the AV technician, a young man who was standing by his station looking completely shell-shocked. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world right now. Can you connect this phone to the projector? I asked him quietly. The same way the live stream camera was connected? He just nodded, his eyes wide as saucers, and took the phone from my trembling hand. He fumbled with a cord for a moment. A few seconds later, the giant screen behind me, the one that had shown Paige's act of arson, flickered to life. And there, projected 10 feet high for everyone in the room and everyone online to see, was the message thread between Grant and Paige. I stepped aside, letting their words, speak for themselves. The room was utterly, completely silent as 150 people read the evidence of their affair. They read about the lies, the secret trips, the sickening pet names. They read his disgusting, cold-blooded plan to marry me for my grandmother's inheritance. And they read his final, damning message, sent just the night before, calling Paige his soulmate. When I judged that they had read enough, I gave the tech a small nod. He disconnected the phone, and the screen went blank. So, as you can see, I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed, the wedding is off. I paused, letting the finality of those 4 words sink into the silent room. I refuse to stand here and enter into a sacred vow with a man who has betrayed me so deeply, and I refuse to pretend that the woman who did this to me, who plotted with him to use me, is my family. I looked directly into the main camera for the live stream, knowing thousands of people were watching. To anyone watching who has ever been lied to, who has ever been made to feel small, who has ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, know that you are not alone. And you deserve better. We all deserve better. I turned back to the guests. Thank you all for coming. There's an open bar and a lot of food that's already paid for. Please, enjoy it on me. Celebrate the truth. I looked to the front row and saw Corinne. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling at me. A proud, fierce smile that gave me more strength than anything else. Then, something amazing happened. An older woman in the 3rd row, a distant cousin of my mother's whom I barely knew, stood up and started clapping. It wasn't polite clapping. It was slow, deliberate, and full of conviction. Then someone else stood up, and then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, not with the polite applause of a wedding ceremony, but with a thunderous, supportive ovation. They weren't clapping for a jilted bride. They were clapping for a survivor. And as I stood there, bathed in the warmth and sound of their support, I felt the last of the pain and humiliation wash away, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. I had lost a wedding. But I had saved myself. The room was spinning, not from shock anymore, but from the overwhelming wave of support. The wedding I had meticulously planned for a year was over in 20 minutes of chaos, truth, and fire. As the applause died down, a new kind of energy filled the room, a frantic, buzzing excitement. People immediately pulled out their phones, their thumbs flying across the screens. I didn't need to be a media expert to know that they were texting, tweeting, and posting, sharing what they had just witnessed. The story of Cleveland's craziest wedding was already going viral, and I was at the center of the storm. My father, his face like a thundercloud, was making a beeline for the bridal suite where I had left Grant and Paige. I think he honestly intended to commit some form of bodily harm. Grant's father, Richard, a man of quiet dignity, intercepted him. He placed a hand on my dad's arm and said something in a low, placating voice. They were already in damage control mode, 2 fathers trying to manage the fallout from their children's catastrophic mistakes. Guests started to move. Some came up to me, their faces etched with sympathy and admiration, offering hugs and words of support. "You are the strongest woman I know," one of my work colleagues said, squeezing my hand tightly. "Don't you ever forget that." Others, mostly the friends of Grant's family and the country club set, began quietly slipping out the side exits, their faces tight with embarrassment. They didn't know what to say, and honestly, I was glad they were gone. Their world of polite pretenses had no place here today. The venue manager, a man named Paul who had been so helpful during the planning, approached me, looking pale and completely out of his depth. "Miss Mitchell." "Lainey, my God. What are your instructions?" It was strange. I should have been a sobbing mess on the floor, but instead, I felt a bizarre sense of clarity. I was in charge. "The party goes on," I said, my voice firm. "Tell the band to scrap the slow songs and play something upbeat. Tell the bartenders to pour freely. This isn't a wedding reception anymore." This is a celebration of freedom. He nodded, looking relieved to have a task, any task, to focus on. Yes, ma'am. A freedom party. I can do that. My boss, Sterling, a man who lived and breathed public relations, appeared at my side as if by magic, holding 2 flutes of champagne. He handed one to me. That, he said, his eyes gleaming with a kind of professional admiration that was both unnerving and oddly comforting, was the most spectacular act of personal brand management I have ever witnessed in my life. A masterclass in crisis communication. I couldn't help but let out a short, surprised, slightly hysterical laugh. Only you would see it that way, Sterling. I'm deadly serious, he said, lowering his voice. You didn't just expose them. You took control of the narrative. You owned your story before anyone else could tell it for you. Corporations pay our firm hundreds of thousands of dollars for that kind of recovery, and you did it in a slip dress with a microphone. He took a sip of his champagne. When you're ready, we need to talk about a promotion. A big one. I saw my mother across the room. She was holding a sobbing, incoherent Paige by the arm, her face a mask of cold fury. I saw her look at Paige, her youngest daughter, and say something sharp and low that I couldn't hear. And then she delivered a slap so loud and crisp that it seemed to cut through the noise of the entire ballroom. It wasn't my victory, but it felt like a small, satisfying measure of justice all the same. Grant was nowhere to be seen. He had, I learned later, scurried out a back exit like the coward he was the moment I started walking down the stairs. I stood there, sipping champagne, watching the bizarre, surreal party unfold around the ruins of my old life, and I knew a new one was about to begin. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you gave me a like, and I understand that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment the number 1, and let me tell you what happened next. The next day, the adrenaline was gone, completely gone, and in its place was a bone-deep exhaustion that felt like it had settled into my soul. My apartment, which had been a joyful hive of activity for months with dress fittings and favor assembly parties, felt cavernously quiet. The pre-wedding excitement that had filled every corner had evaporated, leaving a hollow, lonely echo. I woke up on the couch, still in my clothes from the day before, to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. It had been doing that for hours. I glanced at the screen, 112 new text messages, 47 missed calls. Texts from friends offering support. Missed calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, no doubt wanting the gossip. And, of course, a string of desperate, rambling voicemails from Grant. I pressed my thumb on his contact and, with a grim sense of satisfaction, hit block. Then I did the same for Paige. Corinne had stayed the night, a loyal soldier refusing to leave her post. When I finally sat up, she was in the kitchen, making coffee, fielding my calls like a professional gatekeeper. No, Mrs. Davenport, she is not available to speak with you right now, I heard her say firmly into the phone. No, I will not give her a message. Goodbye. She hung up and slid a steaming mug into my hands. Thank you, I said, my voice hoarse. My throat ached, as if I had been the one screaming. Anytime, she replied, her expression soft but determined. Now, what's the plan, General? We have a few things to deal with. She was right. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a multifaceted disaster with legal and financial strings attached. The first thing I did was call my parents. My dad answered on the first ring. The conversation was one of the hardest of my life. My mom was still too upset to talk, alternating between white-hot rage at Paige and soul-crushing heartbreak for me. My dad, however, was practical. He was a man who fixed things. Lainey, he said, his voice heavy with a pain that mirrored my own. You need to make a police report. Today. What Paige did was a crime. It was arson. It was destruction of property. You can't let her get away with that. There have to be consequences. A part of me wanted to just let it go, to cut them all out of my life and never look back, to avoid any more drama. But he was right. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a criminal act. So, that afternoon, Corinne drove me to the police station. Sitting in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, telling a uniformed officer the whole sordid story, made it all feel sickeningly real. I described the dress, the lighter, the live stream. The officer was professional, but I could see the shock in his eyes. He'd probably never heard a story quite like it. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Corinne, who gave me a firm nod. Yes, I said, my voice clear. Yes, I do. It felt like another small act of reclaiming my power. This is where I first thought I might need to talk to a lawyer to understand what my rights were. Next came the financials, the endless, tangled web of wedding planning. The venue. The caterer. The band. The florist. I had put down significant deposits, much of it from that special college fund my dad had so carefully managed for me, which had grown over the years. I spent the next few days on the phone, a headset on, a spreadsheet open, explaining the situation over and over again. To my surprise, most of the vendors were incredibly understanding. The story had, as I suspected, become the biggest news in Cleveland. The Cleveland Plain Dealer ran an article with the headline, "Bridal Fury, Livestream Exposes Cheating Fiancé and Arsonist Sister." Everyone knew. The venue waived the cancellation fee. The caterer even offered a partial refund. "Honey, you deserve it," the owner, a gruff woman named Maria, told me. The hardest part was dealing with the gifts. They had been arriving for weeks, filling my small apartment. A toaster. A set of crystal wine glasses. A beautiful handmade quilt from my great-aunt. I couldn't keep them. They felt tainted. So, Corinne and I formed an assembly line. She would unbox a gift, I would write out a thank you card that doubled as a cancellation notice. "Thank you for the beautiful dinnerware," I wrote, my hand cramping. "Unfortunately, the wedding has been cancelled. I will be returning your generous gift, but I am so grateful for your friendship and support." Each card was a small, painful reminder of the future that had been stolen from me, the home I would never build with him. A few weeks after what the local media had dubbed the wedding that wasn't, the dust began to settle in my personal life, but the story itself had taken on a life of its own. It had been picked up by national blogs, women's magazines, and even a few daytime talk shows had reached out. My face was suddenly associated with a very public story of betrayal and empowerment. I thought it would be a source of endless humiliation. I braced myself for whispers and stares when I went to the grocery store. But something else happened instead. My email inbox and social media DMs were flooded with messages. Not from gawkers looking for more gossip, but from women. Hundreds and hundreds of them, from all over the country. Women who had been cheated on. Women with toxic siblings and narcissistic parents. Women who had been manipulated and lied to for years. They shared their own stories with me, raw, painful stories they had never told anyone else. And they thanked me. They said my public stand, my refusal to be a silent victim, gave them courage. One woman from Oregon sent me a long email. "I've been in a loveless, emotionally abusive marriage for 10 years, too afraid to leave because of the financial fallout and what people would say. After watching a clip of your story, I called a divorce lawyer for the first time. Thank you for showing me my own strength." My personal drama had accidentally started a movement. I had become an unwilling symbol of resilience. At work, Sterling was true to his word. He called me into his big corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the lake. He got straight to the point, as always. "Lainey," he said, steepling his fingers. "We've had 3 new client inquiries this week. Major brands. And they all specifically asked for you. They said they want the woman who knows how to handle a crisis with guts and grace." He slid a thick folder across his polished desk. I've been wanting to open a new department for a while. One focused on personal branding and crisis management for individuals, not just corporations. CEOs, politicians, public figures who find themselves in the middle of a media firestorm. I want you to run it. We'll build a team around you. This is a vice president level promotion, Lainey, with a salary and bonus structure to match. I was stunned into silence. Just a month ago, my life was in ruins. I was worried about paying my rent, about facing my colleagues. Now, I was being offered the biggest opportunity of my career. It was an opportunity born from my deepest pain, but it was an opportunity nonetheless. I accepted without hesitation. The new role was exactly what I needed. It was my therapy. I poured all my energy, all my anger, and all my newfound strength into it. I was good at it. I understood, on a visceral level, what it felt like to have your story stolen and twisted. I helped other people find their voice and control their own narratives, just as I had done. We launched a campaign for our new department, and the slogan was simple, born directly from my experience: some stories deserve to be told. Loudly. It was a huge success. Meanwhile, the consequences for Grant and Paige were finally rolling in. Paige pleaded guilty to misdemeanor destruction of property and reckless endangerment to avoid a felony arson charge. Her lawyer argued for leniency, but the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had seen the video. Paige received 2 years of probation, a hefty fine to repay the cost of the dress, and a year of court-mandated therapy. My mother told me she barely left the house anymore, consumed by a shame so deep it had hollowed her out. Grant's life imploded just as spectacularly. The conservative financial firm where he worked as a wealth manager fired him. His moral turpitude, the termination letter allegedly said, had made him a liability with their high-net-worth clients. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he and Paige had tried to make a go of it, but their relationship, built on a foundation of lies and deceit, crumbled within 2 months. They had destroyed my life to be together, and in the end, they couldn't even stand the sight of each other. There was a certain dark, poetic justice in that. A year passed. A year of 80-hour work weeks, of healing, of rediscovering who I was without the labels of fiancé or sister. The woman who stood in her apartment a year later was not the same woman who had stood in that bridal suite. I was stronger, more confident, more myself. I had sharp new edges, but I was whole. My department at the agency was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. I had even hired Corinne away from her old job to be my second-in-command. We were a formidable team. With the money from my promotion, I had bought my own condo in a beautiful old building in Ohio City, a place that was entirely mine, filled with my own things, my own peace. I had reconnected with my mother, who was slowly learning to set boundaries with Paige. Our relationship was different, more honest, and better for it. I hadn't spoken a single word to Paige or Grant since that day. They were ghosts, figures from a past life. One crisp autumn afternoon, I came home from work to find a single, hand-addressed envelope in my mailbox. The return address was blank, but I recognized the looping, overly perfect handwriting immediately. It was from Paige. My first instinct was to throw it away, to rip it into 100 tiny pieces and let the wind carry it away. But curiosity, or maybe a deep-seated need for final closure, got the better of me. I sat in my quiet living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows, and opened it. The letter wasn't what I expected. There were no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to share the blame. It was just an apology. A raw, rambling, and deeply pathetic one. She wrote about her therapy, about the painful process of confronting her lifelong, corrosive jealousy of me. She wrote about the emptiness of her victory, how getting what she thought she wanted had only revealed how little it was worth. She wrote that destroying my happiness hadn't brought her any of her own, it had only left her utterly alone, alienated from the family she had fractured. She said she was sorry. She wrote the words over and over. She knew it meant nothing, that she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she had to say it. I read the letter twice, letting the words wash over me. A year ago, this letter would have sent me into a spiral of rage. 6 months ago, it might have made me cry. But now? I just felt a quiet sense of finality. A strange, sad peace. Her apology wasn't really for me. It was for her. It was the last, desperate act of a person trying to forgive herself. I folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. I walked over to a wooden box on my bookshelf where I kept old memories, photos from my childhood, concert tickets, letters from old friends. I placed Paige's letter inside and closed the lid. It was a part of my story, a dark and painful part, but it was not the defining chapter. It was just a page I was ready to turn. I didn't need her apology to move on. I had already done that on my own. I had taken the worst day of my life, the absolute bottom, and I had turned it into the foundation for a better, stronger, more authentic one. Some fires are meant to destroy. But others just clear the way for new things to grow. And I was, finally, ready to grow. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with you. If you've ever been through a betrayal or had to start your life over from the ashes, please know that you are stronger than you think, and you are not alone. If you have a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you'd like to hear more stories from a life that's been, well, let's just say eventful, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps more than you know. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.